Hello. There are many different house systems used in astrology. Many people use what are called quadrant houses, like Placidus houses or Koch houses. The whole sign houses are also very popular. Whole sign houses are used in Vedic astrology and also in what's called Hellenistic astrology. And some people use equal houses. And in vibrational astrology, we use three house systems. We use equal houses, MC houses, and vertex houses. So some people use more than one house system, and each house system tells us something a little bit different from the other ones. So in vibrational astrology, we use these three house systems, and I'm going to explain why we do it. First thing is, let's take a look at what we mean by these house systems. So here is the birth chart of the actress Winona Ryder using Placidus houses. This happens to be the tropical zodiac. And Placidus houses is a very popular quadrant house system, which means it divides the section from the midheaven. Here we see the midheaven at 5 Libra and the ascendant into three sections. And you'll notice that for Winona Ryder, these 10th, 11th, and 12th houses are relatively small. Look at how big the 7th, 8th, and 9th houses are. So using a quadrant house system like Placidus houses, we end up with Jupiter and Neptune in the 12th house, for example. But a different quadrant house system, let's go over here to settings house system. Let's use, for example, Campanus. And let's see what happens with Campanus. Campanus moves Mercury and Venus also into the 12th house. So the different quadrant houses like Campanus versus Placidus, the difference between them is where these intermediate cusps are, like the 11th and 12th cusps. So with the Campanus houses, Winona Ryder has Mercury, Venus, Neptune, and Jupiter in the 12th house. Going back to Placidus houses, she has just Jupiter and Neptune in 12th houses. So it does make a difference. Now let's look at equal houses. What's going to happen with equal houses, of course, is the 10th house is going to, instead of being way over here at 5 Libra, is going to move over to be square the ascendant, so it'll move back to 12 Virgo, and every house will be the same size. So let's go to setting house system equal, and there they are, with again the 10th house square the ascendant. Of course, every house cusp is going to be 12 degrees, 54 minutes of the succeeding sign. So with different house systems, some of the planets move into a different house. Let's look at what happens with equal from the MC. So house system equal from the MC. This is another house system used in vibrational astrology. So with equal from the MC, very interestingly, Uranus is in the 10th house. Sun, Mercury, and Venus are in the 11th house. Only Jupiter is in the 12th house. Notice the ascendant is in the 12th house because the ascendant is not the same as the first house cusp. So equal from the midheaven, or sometimes we just call it MC houses, means you take the midheaven, 5 Libra 18, and you do equal from there. So with equal houses, we do equal from the ascendant, and with midheaven houses, we're doing equal from the midheaven. So here we see the MC houses, every house is the same size, starting with the midheaven. Now, even though we start with the midheaven is still the 10th house. So 5 Libra 18 is the beginning of the 10th house. And if we do vertex houses, then the 7th cusp is going to start with the vertex. We'll start with 26 Cancer 10, and you'll have equal houses from there. So go to settings, house system, vertex on the 7th, and there it is. Vertex is on the 7th cusp, and everything is equal from there. And here we end up with Sun, Mercury, and Venus in the 10th house. So you get some dramatic differences depending on which house system you use. So again, in vibrational astrology, we use three house systems. Equal is one of them, MC is the other one, and vertex is the third one. It sounds strange, sounds unusual, because it's a new idea. But let me explain why. I think the reasons for using these three house systems is impressive. I'm going to give, I think, 6 or 7 reasons. First reason why we use these three house systems in vibrational astrology is because we do not want to use intermediate cusps. So intermediate, I'm sorry, let me say that better. We do not want to use a quadrant house system like Placidus or Koch or Campanus. Why do we not want to use a quadrant house system? Because with a quadrant house system, if somebody is born near the Arctic Circle, the ascendant can be conjunct the midheaven. Believe it or not, I have whole separate videos on all of these details. A lot of specific videos on all these details. What I'm doing in this video is summarizing the key reasons for why we use equal, MC, and vertex. First reason, we don't want to use any quadrant house system because the intermediate cusps disappear sometimes near the Arctic Circle. Therefore, quadrant houses could not possibly be accurate. For example, back in the 1970s, I consulted several people born in the northern part of Norway. It was a family and friends of people born in Norway, most of them born in a northern part of Norway up near the Arctic Circle. Some of them had 6 houses extremely large and the other 6 houses extremely small. I mean, it was really extreme. I remember one person, her 10th, 11th, and 12th houses, all 3 of them together was about 40 degrees with no planets there. And in a more extreme case, they could be conjunct. And the people are well balanced, they're normal, all the houses seem to be active in their lives. It just doesn't make sense that you would have people with half of their houses disappearing, but life is normal and those houses are still functioning. So in vibrational astrology, we're very evidence-based. We're looking at the information. Do our theories match our observations? And even if they're not part of our consulting service, we know that as a fact, this happens. And here I am, consulting in North Florida in the 1970s, but not everybody's born in North Florida. And I had people born in, like I said, northern part of Norway, and their charts were just incredibly skewed. But they were normal. So there's a problem with quadrant houses. They just fall apart. Also, related to this, I just said that the ascendant can be conjunct the midheaven. So that tells us that the way we think of the ascendant and midheaven as being in 2 different directions is not necessarily true. And furthermore, even the ascendant itself appears to not exist. Now, this is such a new idea. People are resistant to it because we depend on the ascendant. We assume everybody has an ascendant. It's arguably the most important part of the chart. But for a chart near the Arctic Circle, the ascendant can move 30 degrees in 1 second. Boom. The ascendant moved 30 degrees. It goes chaotic. And in another video on this, I explained how there's an airport in a town called Rovaniemi. I think it's in Finland, Rovaniemi, and that airport is right on the Arctic Circle, and sometimes the ascendant, it goes chaotic. It just starts moving extraordinarily fast. We don't really know where it is. We don't really know where it exists. It's not an ascendant that we can think of. I mean, we would have to have a chart time to like 1,000th of a second. It's not realistic. So the fact is, it appears that the ascendant sometimes does not even exist. So we have to revolutionize. We need to make some major changes in the way we think about astrology to accommodate these facts. And I've done that. So I've developed a theory that the vertex becomes increasingly strong in situations where the ascendant no longer exists. So where the ascendant starts moving, 30 degrees in 1 second of time, or it doesn't even have to go that fast. It's just, we don't even know where it is. It really doesn't exist. The vertex is getting increasingly strong under those situations, and the vertex and the anti-vertex take the place of the ascendant. Now, also interesting is that when you're near the equator, the vertex can act erratically. So they're a perfect balance to each other. The vertex goes crazy near the equator, and the ascendant can go crazy near the Arctic Circle. So the basic rule is that the ascendant is always strong within about 60 degrees of the equator. That's almost everybody. Normally we're doing charts for people born below 60 degrees north and, between 60 south and 60 north. The ascendant definitely exists. And if you're 60 degrees within the poles, which is also a lot of our people, anywhere from 30 north up to 90 north or 30 south to 90 south, if you're born sufficiently far from the equator, then the vertex is always strong. So for most people, the vertex and the ascendant are both important. My point is this, relative to houses we use. In VA, we adapt our ideas to observations. If the ascendant disappears, which it does, and life goes on normally, we can't ignore that fact. It's telling us that under certain conditions, the ascendant is no longer powerful. It doesn't exist, but the vertex takes its place. Okay, this is going to lead us into the idea of using the vertex, right? So this is where we start. You can already start to feel, why do we have equal from the vertex? Because there are some charts where the ascendant is acting chaotically and the vertex is acting very normally. I have videos that show examples of this, and I step through and you can see it for yourself. Here I want to make the points as to why we use these house systems. We need the vertex to replace the ascendant, and in looking at people's charts and interpreting them this way, it makes sense. It makes sense. So we need to let our ideas in astrology evolve, develop, grow. Let them be modified according to new information. We don't have to be so resistant to change. Okay, now third reason. So what we've seen with the first two reasons is that there are big problems with quadrant houses. We don't want to use them. There are situations where they don't make any sense. They don't fit what our clients are like. Excuse me. Now, whole sign houses. One reason why I reject whole sign houses is this. With whole sign houses, they're, in a sense, are not houses. They're just zodiac signs. So whatever sign is rising is the rising sign. Well, let me show you real quickly. I think you all know this, but just to show you, is if I go to Settings, House System, and we go to Whole Sign Houses, then Winona Ryder happens to have ascendant at 12 degrees Sagittarius, so the whole sign of Sagittarius is the first house, whole sign of Capricorn is the second house, whole sign of Aquarius is the third house, and so on. The problem with this is that when a planet goes into a new sign, so say the moon goes into Aries or Taurus or any planet, Mercury, when it goes into Sagittarius, any planet changing a sign should have huge impact globally, collectively as well as individually, because number one, the sign has changed and that should change the mood and so on, and everybody's aware of that. But if you're using whole sign houses, let's think about an example. Say the sun here at 5 degrees Scorpio for Winona Ryder. About 5 or 6 days earlier, the sun went into Scorpio. So around October 23rd or 24th of every year, sun goes into Scorpio. Well, when the sun goes into Scorpio, it enters Winona Ryder's 12th house. For you, maybe it's your 3rd house. For me, maybe it's my 5th house. For somebody else, maybe it's their 8th house, whatever. Everybody is having the planet go into a new house. Well, transits through houses are very personal. They're affecting my personal life. They're not so, global and collective. The houses are individual to me. And now we have made the houses the same as signs. We've conflated them together so that when the sun goes into Scorpio, Winona Ryder all of a sudden has her 12th house activated along with 1/12 of the rest of the population. The whole population is broken into 12 types. We no longer get all of the variability, all of the distinct differences. If you use the rising sign, only Winona Ryder has 12 Sagittarius rising. Only 1 out of 360 people will have the same ascendant. So it's very individual to her. And what we need to do in astrology is we need to use things that are individual to the person because everybody's life is different. So when the sun goes into Scorpio, we don't see whole masses of people all acting the same way, going through obviously the same changes. So again, what we're doing is we're trying to have the astrological information fit our observations. So anything that puts people into 12 categories and expects 1/12 of the population to all be acting extremely similarly at the same time is not realistic. And the houses define a basic structure of who you are. In Vedic astrology, houses are the fundamental thing that sets the structure of who you are, because there are 12 types based on the 12 rising signs. Any astrology that's based on whole sign houses does that. So whole sign houses we're very skeptical of. Doesn't completely rule them out, but it makes us extremely skeptical of them. Fourth point, getting back to quadrant houses, is that if quadrant houses worked, if Placidus houses work or Campanus, those intermediate cusps would be extremely sensitive points, obviously. Let's go back to, say, Placidus houses. So for Winona Ryder, when a planet reaches 17 Capricorn 51, it goes into her second house. What a huge difference going from the first house to the second house. These intermediate cusps should be extremely sensitive. Maybe not as completely sensitive as the angular cusps, but similar. They should trigger things. No astrologer has presented strong evidence that things do get triggered at these cusp points. The cusps appear to be very vague, not precise, unlike the angular cusps. So it's a little bit odd. The angular cusps are crisp, sharp. A planet goes over your seventh cusp. Oh my God, it's obvious. Every astrologer knows this. These angular cusps are very powerful. Why are the intermediate cusps so weak and flimsy? And nobody can show exactly where they are. And astrologers are good. You know, they're looking at transits. I've looked at transits over and progressions over these cusps. I couldn't see something clearly happening. When planets go, transient planet goes over an angular cusp, oh my God. It's almost every time it's obvious. So there's no evidence that the cusp is really there very specifically. So maybe it's just a fuzzy thing and there's really only 4 cusps. Okay, that would fit the data, except that the ascendant can be conjunct the midheaven and quadrant houses disappear altogether anyway. Okay, so anyway, it's just another reason why we are very disinclined to use quadrant houses or whole sign houses. Now, a fifth reason why we use these 3 house systems, equal, midheaven, and vertex. Note that these 3 house systems are all equal house systems. They're equal starting from the ascendant, equal starting from the midheaven, or equal starting from the 7th cusp. And one of them, the equal houses, is anchored to the first. One of them, the midheaven houses, is anchored to the midheaven, and the vertex houses is anchored to the 7th cusp. Okay, here's the fifth reason why we use these 3 house systems. In the 1970s, I started interviewing people in 1972, and for many years I interviewed and then consulted thousands of people. I kept records trying to figure out if astrology works. Primarily, I was interviewing people to find out if astrology works. Thousands of people. And one day I went through my file cabinet. I had a physical file cabinet where I kept a chart of everybody that I interviewed, and I took out each chart wheel and I thought about which house placement seemed very, very clear, very obvious. So such as a person who is very philosophical and travels a lot, who has sun in the 9th house with Koch house system. So I would figure that, wow, this person is philosophical, they travel a lot, there seems to be a clear 9th house thing, and sun is in the 9th house with Koch houses, so I put a little check mark, and I counted up. 1 checkpoint for Koch houses, 9th house works. And maybe that sun was in the 9th house for Placidus houses as well. It would get a point. And I compared Campanus, Koch, Placidus, whole sign, and equal. I compared 5 house systems. At the time, those were the 5 that I had a computer program running on a mainframe computer that could produce those calculations. Now, of course, we can do many more house systems. Okay, and here's what I found out. I found out that when a planet is near an angular cusp, so here's Winona Ryder, Jupiter is just above the ascendant. In every case where a planet was within about 10 degrees of the angular cusp, so Jupiter, Neptune pretty much, about 11 degrees, Saturn, about 7 degrees below, Pluto, a few degrees to the right, and Uranus, about 10 degrees to the left, they seem to work. And in fact, every single case, I had dozens and dozens, I don't remember the total number, of client files, and every time I would say to myself, oh, Winona Ryder, she definitely has Saturn in the 6th house. I mean, for example, she's a hard worker, blah, blah, blah. There it was, in the 6th house, using quadrant houses. So Jupiter, Neptune, Saturn, Uranus, Pluto, when it got far away from the angles, didn't work. So I would say, Sun is definitely in the 11th house for this person, but it would not be in the 11th house. It might be for equal or whole sign, or none of them. It didn't work. So that was interesting. And you might have noticed that when you're interpreting charts, if you're a Western astrologer, that when you see a planet near one of these angular cusps, we think of these cusps as very crisp and clearly defining, like that Pluto's definitely in the 9th. When we see planets in these intermediate areas like Sun, it seems kind of fuzzy. So that was interesting. And I had an explanation for it, which is quadrant houses work. However, I have other evidence that I showed on the previous slide. Quadrant houses do not work. So you get this cognitive dissonance. They can't work because half the houses disappear. But when I use them looking at my clients, they work very beautifully in terms of planets being near those angular cusps working. And then one day, presto, boom, I got an idea for an alternative explanation. And it removed the cognitive dissonance, which is this. What if there's an equal house system that starts from the midheaven? Then Pluto is in the 9th, Uranus is in the 10th by the midheaven houses. And by the ascendant houses, these are in the correct house. So maybe the reason why this always works, that when a planet is near an angular cusp, its house placement really works. The interpretation makes sense is because it is in that house by one of the 2 house systems, by either the equal houses or the midheaven houses. Now I've resolved a cognitive dissonance. I've resolved a conflict in my theory. That now I have something that makes sense of what I saw with my clients and makes sense with my clients born in northern part of Norway, where their charts did not make sense with quadrant houses. So now I have, if I use 2 house systems, I can explain my clients who were born in Norway because they don't have houses disappearing, all houses are the same size, and it's going to work for the majority of my clients who are not born in those extreme latitudes. I've come up with something that fits my observations. So this is why we use equal, MC, and vertex, because it fits all of our observations. Okay, so that's the 5th reason. 6th reason is theoretical. Now, I prefer reasons based on observation. Most important, because if a theory works, great, but it's got to fit your observations. I mean, the observations are like the tangible thing we're trying to explain. But in addition to fitting the observations, it also fits the theory. And when you have an idea that makes sense by observations and by theory, that's the best. And it fits theory. And we have a detailed and compelling theory on how zodiac signs and houses are created. It's a very involved theory. If you haven't learned about this, my 5-minute summary right now is going to sound very abstract and wild and weird and, maybe a little bit strange. But if you go through the tutorial videos I have on this and you go through it all very carefully, it's very, very simple, very compelling, very elegant theory for why there are zodiac signs and why there are houses. And I'll summarize it very briefly, and if you haven't heard this before, your eyes may just glaze over, don't worry about it, is that everything in nature has a quality called spin. Subatomic particles have spin. It's not a physical spin, but they have something called angular momentum, so it's a kind of spin. The Earth spins on its axis. The Earth revolves around the Sun, which we're considering to be a kind of spin, a kind of a circularity or elliptical roundness. And we propose that embedded in spin are number sequences like Paisano periods and prime numbers. And what happens is when you put Paisano periods and prime numbers around a circle, they generate 12 sections of 30 degrees, which is like our zodiac, 12 sections of 30 degrees. And we have a theory that these 12 sections of 30 degrees get anchored to the tropical zero Aries point and to the ascendant point. So they get anchored to the ascendant because of what's called dimension reduction. This is similar to ideas in superstring theory, where the whole sphere collapses into 2 dimensions of a great circle, and then where those 2-dimensional great circles intersect, contains the information of the entire sky. And that's what the ascendant is, and that's what tropical zero Aries is. Anyway, that's a 5-minute explanation of something that takes hours to explain in other videos. The point is this: the tropical zodiac, starting at the vernal equinox point, and the ascendant astronomically are nearly identical. They're both great circles intersecting the great circle of the ecliptic plane. Extremely similar. Why would one of them, the tropical zodiac, have 12 sections of 30 degrees and the other one does not? Would be a little bit strange and bizarre, especially because we have a very clear theory on how these 12 sections are created. That leads us to the conclusion that the ascendant acts just like the vernal equinox, and it anchors these 12 sections of 30 degrees, and we call the houses. The midheaven is also identical in concept. Astronomically, it's the same exact idea as the ascendant and the vernal equinox. It's the intersection of another great circle with the ecliptic plane, and the vertex is an intersection of yet another great circle. They're all created by the same astronomical phenomenon, and they all create structures in space. If you watch the videos where I explain this in detail, it's fascinating, it's intriguing, it's inspiring, it's clear, it's compelling, and it's completely internally consistent. There's nothing contradictory about it. So we have theory to support it as well. So all of our observations that we notice, all of the problems, like when you're up near the Arctic Circle, the ascendant going crazy and we don't know where it is, all of these problems are completely resolved. Everything's clear, no exceptions, and we can proceed. And the 7th reason why we use these three house systems is that when you talk to your clients, you're looking at friends and family, famous people, and you're using these three house systems, they work. I mean, that's a subjective thing, but it's not like we go to use them in practice and we're having problems. They're working very, very beautifully. So it has no problems, whereas all the other house systems have problems. So the bottom line, the conclusion, is that this concept that there are three house systems, the equal houses, the MC houses, the vertex houses, is the only idea, it's the only concept for houses that we have that does not have any problems in any of the above 7 items that I listed. Whereas quadrant houses have some problems, whole sign houses have problems, and this does not. By problems, I mean things we can't explain, that don't make sense, that don't fit our observations. Therefore, we use these three house systems because it's very strongly supported. And that 7th point, that it works with our clients, there we go. I mean, why not? It took a long time to figure this out, that there are, equal houses from the midheaven and from the vertex. But over time, those details were worked out and everything is consistent. There's no problems. There's no weak spots. If you use quadrant houses, you have a weak spot. Sooner or later, you could be doing a chart for somebody flying into Rovaniemi airport or leaving the airport, or maybe there's an accident there, or for whatever reason, and you have no ascendant. And you have 6 houses that have disappeared in some parts of the day. And there's only 6 houses, and the ascendants conjunct the midheaven, or the descendants conjunct the midheaven. I mean, conjunct exact. So, it could be exactly conjunct. So you just run into big, big problems sooner or later if you had done enough charts. And I don't like to be biased by the fact I don't live near Rovaniemi. Rovaniemi has, I think, 100,000 people. What if I was an astrologer living in Rovaniemi and a lot of my clients were born there? I'd be having problems with clients, regularly. So these are realities. And Rovaniemi, of course, is not the only place. So there you go, my friends. You have an understanding now of why we use these 3 house systems. And by the way, if it seems odd to use more than one house system, we look at the zodiac as almost like another house system. The houses and the zodiac, they're all 12 sections of 30 degrees that function in very similar ways. Okay, so that's it, my friends. I talk about these issues separately in different videos when I'm addressing something specific, like I'm talking about how the ascendant disappears near the Arctic Circle or something. But to bring together, for practical purposes as astrologers, what house system do we use? Why do we use it? These are the reasons why we use these house systems. Doesn't mean we're 100% certain, like everybody else is wrong and we're right. No. That's not what we're doing. All we're doing is just trying to fit observations and theory all together so everything makes sense. And right now, this is by far the best we have, and it moves us from having a lot of contradictions, a lot of confusion, a lot of cognitive dissonance, to having none. There's no problem. This works. It works under all conditions. It makes sense theoretically. Problem solved, and it's working with our clients. So at some point we may run into a major problem, but for now it works. So it's a no-brainer. This is what we're doing. Okay, my friends, thank you very much for listening. God bless. Namaste.